I dedicated 30 years of my life to that hospital. 30 years of sleepless nights, emergency surgeries, and saving lives. I trained residents, perfected techniques, and built a reputation that made patients request me specifically. But that morning, I received a message that made my blood run cold. Your name has been removed from the surgical team. Decision of the new technical director. Just like that. No explanation. No prior conversation, nothing. I felt the floor opening beneath my feet. How could they simply erase 3 decades of dedication with a single message? The new technical director had arrived 6 months earlier, young and arrogant, with revolutionary ideas about modernizing the hospital. From day one, he made it clear he had no respect for those he called the old guard. He wanted young surgeons, new techniques, fresh blood. And I, at 58, was apparently too old for his vision. But what he didn't know, what nobody there knew, was that I held something he could never imagine. A secret I had kept for years, something that could change everything in a single moment. He had just made the biggest mistake of his career by underestimating me, and he was about to learn that some people should never be dismissed so carelessly. I still remember the exact moment I read that message. I was having my morning coffee in the hospital cafeteria, the same place where I had spent countless breaks over 3 decades, when my phone vibrated. The subject line was cold and impersonal. Staff update. My hands trembled as I opened it. Your name has been removed from the surgical team, effective immediately. This decision was made by the new technical director as part of the department restructuring. Thank you for your years of service. Thank you for my years of service? 30 years reduced to a generic thank you in a mass email? I felt my face burning with shame as colleagues walked past my table. Did they know? Had they received the same message? Or was I the only one being thrown out like yesterday's garbage? My heart pounded so hard I thought everyone in that cafeteria could hear it. I had given everything to that hospital. Everything. I had missed birthdays, anniversaries, holidays. I had held patients' hands as they took their last breaths. I had celebrated with families when surgeries succeeded against all odds. And now, some administrator who had barely been there 6 months thought he could erase me with a single email. The new technical director was named Dr. Richard Spencer. He had arrived with fanfare, recruited from a prestigious hospital in another state, brought in to modernize and optimize our surgical department. From his first staff meeting, I knew we would have problems. He stood at the front of the conference room, impossibly young in his expensive suit, and announced his vision. We need to bring this department into the 21st century, he had said, his eyes scanning the room with barely concealed disdain. That means embracing new technologies, new techniques, and frankly, new blood. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment what you would do in this situation. New blood. The phrase had hung in the air like a threat. I watched as the younger surgeons nodded eagerly, already seeing their opportunities for advancement. The more experienced doctors shifted uncomfortably in their seats. We all knew what new blood meant. It meant we were the old blood, ready to be drained away. Over the following months, Dr. Spencer made his intentions increasingly clear. He scheduled important surgeries during times he knew conflicted with my availability. He assigned me to observe procedures performed by surgeons half my age, surgeons I had trained myself. He questioned my techniques in front of residents, undermining years of established expertise. I'm sure that's how you did things back in your day, he would say with a patronizing smile. But we have better methods now. Back in my day, I was 58 years old, not 80. My hands were as steady as ever, my mind as sharp. I had successfully completed over 5,000 surgeries in my career. 5,000 lives I had touched, improved, saved. But to Dr. Spencer, I was just an obstacle to his vision of a sleek, modern department staffed entirely by young surgeons who would never question his authority. The younger doctors started treating me differently too. Not all of them, but enough that I noticed. Some avoided eye contact in the hallways. Others were overly polite, the kind of politeness you reserve for someone you pity. Dr. Jennifer Wade, a surgeon I had personally mentored through her residency, actually stopped mid-conversation when Dr. Spencer approached, as if she were embarrassed to be seen talking to me. I heard about the email. My colleague Dr. Raymond told me one afternoon. He was one of the few senior surgeons who hadn't been pushed out yet. Spencer's cleaning house. He wants a department full of people who will follow his orders without question. Experience and institutional knowledge mean nothing to him. Can he really just remove me from the surgical team like that? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. Even saying the words out loud felt like admitting defeat. Raymond shook his head slowly. Technically, you're still employed by the hospital. You're just not assigned to any surgeries. He's making your position so uncomfortable that you'll quit on your own. That way, he doesn't have to deal with any potential wrongful termination issues. It's a coward's way of firing someone. A lump tightened in my throat. Was I really going to let this happen? Was I going to let some arrogant newcomer destroy everything I had built? Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? The next morning, I went to Dr. Spencer's office. I had rehearsed what I would say, practiced keeping my voice calm and professional. His secretary, a young woman who had started just after he arrived, barely looked up from her computer. Do you have an appointment? She asked in a bored tone. No, but I need to speak with Dr. Spencer about the email I received yesterday. She sighed dramatically, as if I were asking for something outrageous. Dr. Spencer is very busy restructuring the department. He doesn't have time for individual meetings about staffing decisions that have already been finalized. This is about my career, I said, my voice cracking slightly despite my efforts to stay composed. 30 years of service to this hospital. Surely that deserves 10 minutes of his time. She picked up her phone and spoke in a low voice. After a moment, she hung up and gestured vaguely toward his door. He can give you 5 minutes. 5 minutes. 30 years reduced to 5 minutes. Doctor. Spencer was typing on his laptop when I entered, and he didn't look up for a full 30 seconds. A power move I recognized immediately. Finally, he glanced at me with an expression of mild annoyance. I assume this is about the restructuring email? You removed me from the surgical team, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Without any prior discussion, without any warning, without any explanation beyond restructuring. I think I deserve to understand why. He leaned back in his expensive leather chair, the kind the hospital had purchased specifically for him when he arrived. Look, this isn't personal. The hospital board brought me in to modernize operations and improve efficiency. Part of that means evaluating our staff and making difficult decisions about who fits into our vision for the future. And I don't fit into that vision? You're a competent surgeon, he said, in the same tone someone might use to describe a reliable but outdated piece of equipment. But competent isn't enough anymore. We need excellence. We need innovation. We need surgeons who are excited about new technologies and methodologies, not stuck in patterns established decades ago. My hands trembled with contained rage. I have successfully completed over 5,000 surgeries. My patient satisfaction scores are among the highest in the department. I have trained more than 50 residents who have gone on to successful careers. What exactly about my performance suggests I'm not excellent? Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing. Dr. Spencer sighed, as if explaining something to a slow child. It's not about your past performance. It's about where this department is going. I need a team that can move quickly, adapt to new protocols without questioning every change, and frankly, a team that will be here for the next 20 or 30 years, not the next 5. So I'm too old, I said flatly. That's what this is really about. I didn't say that, he replied quickly, probably remembering the hospital's legal department. Age has nothing to do with this decision. It's about fit and vision and the long-term needs of the department. Everything you just described is a euphemism for age discrimination. His expression hardened. If you want to pursue a legal complaint, that's your right. But I should tell you that the hospital board fully supports these staffing decisions. We're well within our rights to restructure departments as we see fit. You're still employed. You're still receiving your salary. You're just not assigned to the surgical rotation anymore. If you find that situation unsatisfactory, perhaps it's time to consider other options. Other options. He meant retirement. He meant disappearing quietly so he wouldn't have to deal with the messy reality of pushing out experienced doctors who inconveniently refused to accept being discarded. I have no intention of retiring, I said, my voice cold. And I have no intention of making this easy for you. He smiled then, a thin, superior smile that made my blood boil. That's certainly your choice. But I should warn you, making things difficult tends to backfire in situations like these. Hospital politics can be quite unforgiving to those who resist necessary changes. I would hate to see your reputation damaged because you couldn't accept the natural evolution of your career. Was that a threat? It sounded like a threat. I left his office with my face burning and my heart racing. He had just threatened my reputation, the thing I had spent 30 years building. And there was nothing subtle about his message. Accept your dismissal gracefully, or he would make sure my departure was even more humiliating. Comment below what you would have done differently. Over the next few weeks, my situation deteriorated rapidly. Dr. Spencer assigned me to administrative duties, reviewing paperwork and updating patient files. Work that could be done by someone with minimal medical training. I watched from behind a desk as younger surgeons performed the procedures I should have been doing. Some of them came to me quietly with questions, still valuing my experience, but they were careful not to let Dr. Spencer see them consulting me. Dr. Jennifer Wade, my former mentee, stopped speaking to me entirely. I saw her in the hallway one morning and attempted a friendly greeting. She glanced nervously toward Dr. Spencer's office and hurried past with a mumbled excuse. The message was clear. Associating with me was career suicide now. The humiliation was constant and calculated. Dr. Spencer scheduled a department meeting to discuss new protocols, and when I attempted to contribute to the discussion based on my years of experience, he cut me off. I think we've heard enough about how things used to be done, he said, his tone dripping with condescension. Let's focus on moving forward, not dwelling on the past. Several younger surgeons exchanged uncomfortable glances, but no one spoke up in my defense. Why would they? Dr. Spencer controlled their futures, their assignments, their chances of advancement. Supporting me would only paint targets on their own backs. I felt the floor opening beneath my feet during another encounter in the surgical wing. A patient's family had specifically requested me for a complex procedure based on my reputation and track record. It was the kind of surgery I had performed hundreds of times with excellent outcomes. But Dr. Spencer intercepted the request. I'm assigning Dr. Wade to this case, he announced in a staff meeting, loud enough for everyone to hear. She's more current on the latest techniques, and I believe she'll provide better outcomes than surgeons using outdated methodologies. Dr. Wade looked mortified, probably remembering that I had taught her those very techniques. But she nodded and accepted the assignment without protest. What choice did she have? Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this. The patient's family was confused and upset when they learned I wouldn't be performing the surgery. They came to the hospital demanding an explanation. I had to sit in a conference room with Dr. Spencer while he smoothly explained that Dr. Wade represents the cutting edge of surgical care and that they were fortunate to have her assigned to the case. But we want her, the patient's husband said, pointing at me. We've heard nothing but excellent things about her experience and success rate. Dr. Spencer's smile never wavered. I understand your concern, but as technical director, I'm responsible for making the best medical decisions for all our patients. Dr. Wade is an exceptional surgeon who has been trained in the most modern techniques. I assure you, your wife will receive outstanding care. The husband looked at me, confusion and disappointment written across his face. What could I say? That I was being pushed out because I was considered too old. That my decades of experience were now considered liabilities rather than assets. I simply nodded and said, Dr. Wade is an excellent surgeon. Your wife will be in good hands. I felt like I was betraying myself with every word. The surgery went well, thankfully. Dr. Wade performed exactly as I had taught her, using the techniques Dr. Spencer had dismissed as outdated. But she received all the credit, all the praise, and I sat at my administrative desk reviewing paperwork that a computer could have handled. Would you do the same in my place? My colleagues started avoiding me in the cafeteria. The table where I had eaten lunch for 30 years was suddenly always full, no empty chairs available. I began eating in my car, unable to bear the pitying glances and awkward silences. This was what Dr. Spencer wanted, I realized. He wanted me so isolated, so miserable, that leaving would feel like relief rather than defeat. But he had miscalculated, because while he saw me as a disposable piece of the hospital's history, he had never bothered to learn the full extent of that history. 28 years ago, when I was a young surgeon just starting my career, this hospital was on the verge of bankruptcy. The previous administration had made a series of disastrous financial decisions, and the board was preparing to sell the facility to a large healthcare conglomerate that planned to gut the staff and convert it into a for-profit urgent care center. I had just received a substantial inheritance from my grandmother, a woman who had taught me the value of education and healthcare. She had worked as a nurse for 40 years and believed deeply that quality medical care should be accessible to the community. When I learned the hospital was in trouble, I made a decision that seemed crazy to everyone in my life. I invested nearly every cent of my inheritance into the hospital. $2 million, an enormous sum at the time, especially for a young surgeon barely 30 years old. My investment came with conditions, legally binding conditions drawn up by attorneys. The hospital had to remain a nonprofit community hospital, committed to serving all patients regardless of their ability to pay. The surgical department had to maintain high standards and couldn't be eliminated or drastically reduced. And I received shares in the hospital corporation, making me a significant minority shareholder. At the time, the board had been grateful. My investment, combined with a few other major donations they secured, saved the hospital from bankruptcy. Over the years, as the hospital grew and became successful again, my shares increased substantially in value. The hospital expanded, added new wings, upgraded equipment. My initial investment had grown to be worth millions. But here was the crucial detail: the hospital's bylaws, established when it incorporated after my investment, included a specific provision. Any decision to remove a shareholder from a clinical position required approval from the board of directors with a supermajority vote. Dr. Spencer, in his arrogance and his rush to purge the department of experienced surgeons, had never bothered to review those bylaws. He had never bothered to learn who actually owned pieces of the hospital he was restructuring so dramatically. Do you think I overreacted? I had kept my shareholding quiet over the years. It felt too much like wielding power over colleagues, and I never wanted anyone to treat me differently because of my financial stake in the institution. I wanted to be respected for my surgical skills, not my investments. But Dr. Spencer had forced my hand. He had humiliated me, dismissed my contributions, and threatened my reputation. Now it was time for him to learn exactly who he had been underestimating. I scheduled a meeting with the hospital's board of directors, not through Dr. Spencer, and not through normal channels. I contacted the board chair directly, Dr. Margaret Thornton, a woman who had been on the board since before my investment. She remembered me, remembered what I had done to save the hospital decades ago. I need to address the board regarding my removal from the surgical team, I told her on the phone. I believe there are bylaws and legal issues that need to be discussed. There was a long pause. Does this have anything to do with your shareholding position? She asked carefully. It has everything to do with it. Another pause. I'll schedule an emergency board meeting for next week. This is something we need to address immediately. The meeting was scheduled for Tuesday evening. Dr. Spencer was informed, of course, that the board wanted to meet with him regarding staffing decisions in the surgical department. I could imagine his confidence as he prepared. He probably thought the board would rubber stamp his decisions, praise his modernization efforts. He had no idea what was coming. Comment if you know someone like this. I arrived at the board meeting 15 minutes early, carrying a folder thick with documents, financial records, legal agreements, hospital bylaws, and 30 years of personnel evaluations showing my consistent excellence. Dr. Margaret Thornton greeted me warmly, and I noticed several other long-serving board members nodding at me with what looked like approval. Dr. Spencer arrived precisely on time, his expensive suit perfectly pressed, his confidence radiating like a force field. He barely glanced at me, probably assuming I was there to plead my case and then be politely dismissed. He took a seat at the conference table and smiled at the board members. Thank you all for taking time for this meeting, he began, his voice smooth and assured. I understand there are some concerns about recent staffing decisions in the surgical department. I want to assure the board that every decision has been made with the hospital's best interests in mind. We're building a modern, efficient department that will serve this community for decades to come. Dr. Thornton didn't return his smile. Dr. Spencer, before you continue, I need to ask you a question. When you made the decision to remove doctors from the surgical rotation, did you review the hospital's bylaws regarding such decisions? His smile faltered slightly. I reviewed the personnel policies and department restructuring guidelines. Everything was done according to standard administrative procedures. But did you specifically review the corporate bylaws? She pressed. I'm not sure I understand the question. Personnel decisions are within the purview of the technical director position. Dr. Thornton looked at me, and I saw something like sympathy in her eyes. Not for me, but for what was about to happen to Dr. Spencer. Perhaps you should explain, she said to me. I opened my folder and pulled out the first document. My hands were steady now, my voice clear. 28 years ago, I invested $2 million in this hospital when it was facing bankruptcy. That investment came with specific conditions and legal protections built into the hospital's bylaws. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? Dr. Spencer's expression shifted from confidence to confusion. I don't see what an old investment has to do with current staffing decisions. The investment made me a shareholder, I continued calmly. And according to Section 7, Paragraph 3 of the hospital's corporate bylaws, any decision to remove a shareholder from a clinical position requires a supermajority vote of the board of directors. You removed me from the surgical rotation without any such vote. In fact, you made that decision entirely on your own authority. The color drained from his face. I wasn't aware you were a shareholder. Clearly, I pulled out another document. This is the current valuation of my shares. Based on the hospital's growth and success over the past 3 decades, my initial investment is now worth approximately $8 million. I currently hold 15% of the hospital's total shares, making me the third largest individual shareholder. The board members were nodding, clearly already aware of these facts. Dr. Spencer looked like he had been struck by lightning. According to these same bylaws, I continued, my voice gaining strength with every word, any major restructuring of a clinical department that affects shareholder positions requires board approval. You have been systematically removing experienced doctors from the surgical rotation for months without any such approval. You have violated the hospital's bylaws repeatedly. Dr. Spencer's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. I watched a realization dawn across his face. He had been so focused on modernizing, so convinced of his own vision, so certain that the experienced surgeons were obstacles to be removed, that he had never bothered to learn the hospital's actual governance structure. Furthermore, I added, pulling out a thick stack of papers, I have documentation here of every incident of age discrimination, hostile work environment actions, and retaliatory behavior you have engaged in over the past 6 months. Comments about old guard and new blood. Assignments clearly designed to humiliate experienced surgeons. Threats against reputations for those who resisted your changes. All documented, dated, and witnessed. Was I wrong to feel this way? Dr. Thornton picked up where I left off. Dr. Spencer, the board has been receiving complaints about your management style for months. We initially dismissed them, assuming they were simply resistance to necessary changes. But when we learned you had removed a shareholder from clinical duties without following proper procedures, we began investigating more thoroughly. What we found was deeply troubling. Another board member, Mr. Patterson, spoke up. We brought you here to modernize the department, not to engage in systematic age discrimination. The hospital could face enormous legal liability for your actions, not to mention the violation of our own corporate bylaws. Dr. Spencer finally found his voice. This is a misunderstanding. I was simply trying to build a more efficient department. If I had known about the shareholding situation, I would have approached things differently. Would you? I asked, my voice sharp. Would you have treated me with respect if you'd known I partially owned the hospital? Because respect shouldn't be contingent on someone's financial stake. Every surgeon in that department deserves to be evaluated based on their skills, their outcomes, their contributions. Not their age, and not their willingness to accept your authority without question. His face flushed red. You don't understand the pressures of modernizing an outdated system. Sometimes difficult decisions have to be made. Difficult decisions, yes, Dr. Thornton said firmly. Illegal ones. No, you have violated hospital bylaws, exposed us to discrimination lawsuits, and created a hostile environment that has driven away experienced medical professionals. The board cannot allow this to continue. How would you act in this situation? I watched Dr. Spencer's expression cycle through shock, anger, and finally fear. He was beginning to understand that this meeting wasn't going to end well for him. "What are you proposing?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Dr. Thornton looked at me. "What would you like to see happen?" I had thought carefully about this moment. I could destroy him completely, use my position to have him fired immediately. But that would make me no better than him. Instead, I said, "I want to be reinstated to the surgical rotation immediately, with full privileges. I want a formal apology to every senior surgeon who has been pushed out or mistreated under his administration. I want the hospital to implement mandatory training on age discrimination for all administrative staff. And I want a complete review of his restructuring decisions to ensure they were based on competence and performance, not age and compliance." "And what about Dr. Spencer's position?" Mr. Patterson asked. I looked directly at Dr. Spencer, who was staring at me with a mixture of hatred and disbelief. "That's up to the board, but I would suggest that any technical director should be required to understand the institution's governance structure before making major decisions. And perhaps someone who values experience as much as innovation would be more appropriate for a hospital that has thrived for decades on the dedication of its long-term staff." The board members conferred quietly for several minutes while Dr. Spencer and I sat in tense silence. Finally, Dr. Thornton addressed us both. "Dr. Spencer, you are suspended from your position effective immediately, pending a full investigation into your management practices and potential bylaw violations. If the investigation confirms systematic discrimination or other policy violations, your employment will be terminated. In the meantime, Dr. Carolyn Hughes will serve as interim technical director." She turned to me. "You are reinstated to full surgical privileges immediately. We apologize for the distress this situation has caused. Subscribe and hit the bell icon for more stories like this." Dr. Spencer stood abruptly, his chair scraping loudly against the floor. "This is ridiculous. I was brought here to modernize this hospital, and now I'm being punished for doing exactly what I was hired to do. She's weaponizing an old investment to protect herself from necessary change." "You were hired to modernize operations," Dr. Thornton said coldly, "not to violate hospital bylaws and discriminate against staff based on age. If you cannot see the difference, then perhaps you're not suited for hospital administration." He turned to me, his face twisted with anger. "You think you've won, but you haven't. You're still too old for this job. You're still stuck in the past. No shareholder status is going to change that." I stood as well, meeting his gaze steadily. "I'm 58 years old. I have successfully completed over 5,000 surgeries with excellent outcomes. I have trained dozens of talented surgeons. I have literally invested millions of dollars in this institution's survival and success. And I will continue practicing medicine here for as long as I choose, because I earned that right through decades of dedication and competence. You, on the other hand, will likely be remembered as the technical director who lasted 6 months before being suspended for incompetence and discrimination." His face went from red to purple. "You have no idea who you're talking to. I have contacts at hospitals across the country. I'll make sure every administrator knows what happened here, how you manipulated the system to protect your outdated career." "Please do," I replied calmly. "I'm sure they'll all be very interested to hear how you violated hospital bylaws, engaged in age discrimination, and had to be suspended after less than a year. I'm certain that will do wonders for your career prospects. Give it a thumbs up if you think I did the right thing." He stormed out of the conference room without another word, leaving behind a silence that felt both heavy and relieving. Dr. Thornton sighed deeply. "I apologize that it came to this. We should have been more careful in our oversight of his management practices. The board failed you and other senior staff members by not recognizing what was happening sooner." "I appreciate that," I said quietly, "but I want to be clear about something. I didn't reveal my shareholding position to wield power or seek special treatment. I revealed it because it was the only way to stop systematic discrimination that was harming not just me, but every experienced surgeon in that department. This was never about my ego or my status. It was about preserving institutional knowledge and protecting people who have dedicated their lives to patient care." "We understand," Mr. Patterson said, "and we're grateful you were willing to take this stand. Heaven knows how many other qualified doctors would have simply left quietly rather than fight back. Over the following weeks, the investigation confirmed everything I had claimed. Dr. Spencer had systematically targeted surgeons over 50 for removal from the surgical rotation, replacing them with younger, less experienced doctors who were more compliant with his authority. He had made numerous comments about age and outdated practices that clearly violated employment discrimination laws. And he had done it all without any regard for the hospital's actual governance structure or legal requirements. His employment was officially terminated 3 weeks after the board meeting. Dr. Carolyn Hughes, a respected surgeon in her early 50s who valued both innovation and experience, became the permanent technical director. One of her first acts was to reinstate the senior surgeon's Dr. Spencer had pushed out and implement a new evaluation system based on actual performance metrics rather than age or compliance. The younger surgeons adjusted quickly to the new administration. Some of them, I think, had been uncomfortable with Dr. Spencer's methods all along but had been too afraid to speak up. Dr. Jennifer Wade came to my office one afternoon, clearly nervous. "I owe you an apology," she said, her voice shaking slightly. "I should have stood up for you. You trained me. You supported my career, and when Dr. Spencer started pushing you out, I was afraid of losing my position. I'm ashamed of how I acted." Comment below what you would have done differently. I could have been angry with her, could have held a grudge for how she had avoided me during those difficult months, but I understood her position. Dr. Spencer had created an environment where loyalty to experienced colleagues felt like career suicide. "You were in an impossible situation," I told her. "I don't blame you for protecting yourself, but I hope you learned something from this experience about the importance of standing up for what's right, even when it's difficult." She nodded, tears in her eyes. "I did, and I promise, if I ever see discrimination or injustice like that again, I won't stay silent." My first day back in the surgical rotation felt like coming home. The familiar rhythm of the operating room, the focused intensity of a complex procedure, the satisfaction of successfully helping a patient. This was what I had missed during those months of administrative purgatory. This was what I had fought to preserve. The patient I operated on that day was a 72-year-old woman with a complicated cardiac condition. It was the type of surgery that required not just technical skill but experience and judgment, the ability to make split-second decisions when unexpected complications arose. The surgery lasted 6 hours, but it was successful. When I spoke with her family afterward, they were grateful and relieved. "We heard about what happened with the previous director," her daughter said quietly. "We're so glad you're back where you belong." Experience matters, especially when it's someone you love on that table. Experience matters. Those 2 words meant everything to me. Would you do the same in my place? Dr. Hughes called a department meeting 2 months after taking over. She stood at the front of the conference room, a stark contrast to Dr. Spencer's arrogant posturing months earlier. "I want to make something clear about our department's values," she said, looking around at all of us. "Innovation and experience are not opposites. They're complementary. We need young surgeons bringing in new techniques and energy. We also need experienced surgeons providing institutional knowledge and judgment. A successful department values both and respects both. Anyone who doesn't understand that doesn't belong in hospital administration." There was applause, genuine and heartfelt. The atmosphere in the department had changed completely. The tension and fear that had permeated everything under Dr. Spencer's leadership had been replaced by mutual respect and collaboration. Young surgeons asked questions of experienced ones without fear of appearing weak. Experienced surgeons learned new techniques from younger colleagues without feeling threatened. It was, I realized, what a healthy department should always have been. I heard through professional networks that Dr. Spencer struggled to find another position. Apparently, word had spread about what happened, and hospital administrators were wary of hiring someone who had violated bylaws and engaged in systematic discrimination. He eventually left hospital administration entirely, though I don't know what he's doing now. Part of me feels a small amount of sympathy for how his career imploded. But a larger part remembers all the talented surgeons whose careers he damaged, all the patients who lost access to experienced doctors, all the institutional knowledge he tried to erase in service of his ego. The hospital thrived under Dr. Hughes's leadership. Patient satisfaction scores improved, surgical outcomes remained excellent, and the blend of experienced wisdom and youthful energy created an environment where everyone could succeed. 3 years have passed since that board meeting. I'm 61 now, still performing surgeries, still training residents, still contributing to the institution I literally invested my life savings in decades ago. I know that someday I will retire, and when that day comes, it will be my choice, made on my terms. Not because some arrogant administrator decided I was too old or too stuck in the past. Do you think I overreacted? I've thought a lot about what happened and what it means. The truth is, I was fortunate. I had the financial resources and legal protections that most people in my situation wouldn't have had. Most people facing age discrimination or hostile work environments don't have shareholdings or bylaws to protect them. They have to endure the humiliation, accept the forced exits, watch their careers dismantled by people who don't value their contributions. That's why I've become an advocate for healthcare workers' rights, particularly for experienced medical professionals facing discrimination. I speak at conferences, I consult with hospitals on best practices for department management, and I share my story as a cautionary tale about what happens when administrators prioritize compliance over competence and youth over experience. I want other people in situations like mine to know that they have value, that their decades of dedication and expertise matter, that age is not a disqualification but an asset. I want them to fight back against discrimination, to document everything, to know their rights. And I want hospital administrators to understand that pushing out experienced professionals doesn't modernize an institution, it weakens it. The hospital where I work has become a model for how to balance innovation with institutional knowledge. We actively recruit talented young surgeons while also retaining and respecting experienced ones. We provide mentorship programs that pair newer doctors with veterans. We evaluate performance based on outcomes, patient satisfaction, and contributions to the department's mission, not on age or willingness to accept every administrative directive without question. It's not perfect. No system is, but it's better, and it exists in part because I refused to accept Dr. Spencer's verdict that I was too old, too outdated, too expendable. Comment if you know someone like this. Sometimes I think about that message I received in the hospital cafeteria 3 years ago. Your name has been removed from the surgical team. Decision of the new technical director. Those words had felt like the end of my career, the erasure of everything I had built. But they turned out to be the beginning of something else. A fight for dignity, for respect, for the right to be valued based on merit rather than age. Dr. Spencer had seen me as an obstacle, a relic of outdated practices, someone to be pushed aside in his quest for a modern department. What he failed to understand was that institutions aren't just buildings and equipment. They're people. They're the accumulated knowledge and experience of everyone who has ever worked there. When you discard that knowledge in pursuit of something shinier and newer, you don't modernize, you destabilize. I saved the hospital once with my money, decades ago when it was facing bankruptcy. I saved it again with my willingness to fight back against destructive leadership. Both times, it required taking risks and refusing to accept what seemed inevitable. My grandmother, the nurse who left me the inheritance I invested in this hospital, used to tell me, never let anyone convince you that experience is a liability. Everything worth knowing is built on the foundation of what came before. She was right. Innovation doesn't require erasing the past. It requires building on it, learning from it, respecting it. I'm still here, still operating, still teaching, still contributing to patient care and surgical excellence. And I will continue to be here, for as long as I choose, because I earn a Tentor Novamentio Continuard, that right through 33 years of dedication, competence, and literal investment in this institution's survival. If you're enjoying this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel, give it a thumbs up, and comment what you would do in this situation. Last week, a young surgical resident approached me after I had completed a particularly complex procedure. She was in her late 20s, brilliant and ambitious, exactly the type of surgeon Dr. Spencer would have favored. "Can I ask you something?" she said hesitantly. I heard about what happened with Dr. Spencer, about how he tried to push you out. You can ask me anything, I replied, washing my hands at the scrub sink. How did you find the courage to fight back? I mean, he was the technical director. He had all the power. Weren't you afraid of making things worse? I dried my hands carefully, thinking about her question. I was terrified, I admitted. Every day, I was afraid that fighting back would destroy whatever was left of my career. But I realized something important. If I didn't fight back, my career was already destroyed. Dr. Spencer had made that decision for me, so I had nothing left to lose by standing up for myself. She nodded slowly. I hope I have that kind of courage if I ever face something like that. You will, I told her. Because you'll remember this conversation. You'll remember that sometimes the only way forward is to refuse to accept someone else's verdict about your worth. That conversation reminded me why all of this mattered. It wasn't just about me and my career. It was about setting an example, showing that discrimination and abuse of power don't have to be accepted as inevitable parts of professional life. Every person who stands up to injustice makes it easier for the next person to do the same. The hospital recently celebrated its 100th anniversary. There was a gala event, speeches about the institution's history and future, recognition of people who had contributed significantly to its success. Dr. Hughes asked me to say a few words about my time here. I stood at the podium, looking out at colleagues young and old, and I spoke about resilience, about how institutions survive not just through buildings and equipment, but through the dedication of people who refuse to let them fail. I talked about my investment 30 years ago and how it had felt like a crazy risk at the time. I talked about how that same hospital had almost discarded me decades later and how I had fought to preserve not just my own career, but the principle that experience and dedication have value. This hospital exists because people believed in it enough to fight for it, I said. Whether that fight meant investing money when it was bankrupt or investing dignity when it was being mismanaged. The next 100 years of this institution will depend on people continuing to fight for what's right, even when it's difficult, even when they're afraid. The applause that followed felt like vindication, not just for me, but for every person who had ever been told they were too old, too outdated, too expendable. Leave me in the comments. Have you been through something similar? Dr. Raymond, my colleague who had warned me about Dr. Spencer's tactics years ago, retired last month. At his farewell party, he pulled me aside. You know what you did, don't you? He asked. By standing up to Spencer, by refusing to just disappear quietly, you saved this department. There were at least a dozen senior surgeons who were preparing to accept forced retirements. When they saw you fight back successfully, they found their own courage to stay and demand respect. I hadn't fully realized the ripple effect of my actions. I had been so focused on my own situation that I hadn't considered how my resistance might empower others. But Raymond was right. The department looked completely different than it would have if Dr. Spencer had been allowed to continue his purge unchecked. We had retained institutional knowledge, mentorship capabilities, and surgical expertise that would have been lost. You did something brave, Raymond continued, and more importantly, you did it the right way.